This is Tax Chats. Hello, I'm Scott Dyring.
And I am Jeff Hoops.
And we're here to chat
about taxes.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tax Chats. I'm Scott Dyring, and I am joined once again by my friend and colleague and tax museum curator, Jeff Hoops. Hello, Jeff.
Hello.
Now, tax museum curator today is an important part of our chat.
Usually it's just like a joke, and Scott's disparaging of my official role.
It is a joke, and I do intend it to be at least a little bit disparaging, but actually it turns out I've been to the tax museum a couple times, and the tax museum has some interesting things. So today, Jeff decided he would wear his tax museum curator badge. He has one. If you
I actually have a physical badge that somebody gave me. Yep, I got it. It's on.
A physical badge, and it says Jeffrey L. Hoops.
Founder and senior curator, even though that's not necessarily my title. I choose the title I have at the tax museum on a daily basis.
What title would you choose?
Today I'm chairman of the board and
chairman
founder
of the board. Okay.
And president. But
so
it varies day to day.
And this is all relevant because it's near the end of the year, and I have decided that Jeff's museum needs an audit. We need to figure out what the museum contains. Jeff, let's audit your museum.
Okay, I think that's fine, but I think in order to do that, I should also audit you a little bit, in that we're going to audit your knowledge of tax history and of the items in the museum. So how I think this audit should work is I'm going to hold up an item, since people can't see through their headphones. I'll describe it to you. Scott can also describe it to you, what he's seeing, and he's going to try to guess why that item might be in the tax museum. I'll tell him if he's right or wrong, and then I'll tell a little bit more background on each item.
And if I can get, say, 75% correct, what do I get?
You get a free visit to the tax museum. I will waive completely the usual entrance fee, and that gift, that prize to you, will be tax-free.
Will it be tax-free because it has no value, or will it be tax-free for some other reason?
You can decide on that one.
Okay, so this is going to be interesting. This will be fun, I think. And we might learn some things about tax history, something that I actually don't know very much about. Now, in full disclosure, I have been to the museum a couple of times, and at that time, it wasn't the curator, it was the tour guide, whose name was also Jeffrey L. Hoops.
A lot of positions filled by Jeffrey L. Hoops at the tax museum.
A lot of positions. So the tour guide did explain a few of these things to me, so I might know some of them because I have been to the tax museum before, but my memory is not always the greatest, so we shall see what I can do.
We're going to start off with one I'm pretty sure you haven't seen, but you might be able to guess. It's not that hard. Okay, so what do I have here? I have here a document. You can see this document. So what is that? I'll read you the words in a little bit, but what do you see? You see an old piece of paper.
I see an old piece of paper inside a glass frame, and it says...
Well-framed, obviously, well-curated. I'll tell you what exactly this is. It reads, Know all men by these presents that we, two names that I can't read because they're in fancy cursive, of the county of Bedford and Commonwealth of Pennsylvania are held and firmly bound unto the Commonwealth aforesaid in the sum of $1,000 lawful money of the United States, to which payment well and truly to be made and done, we bind ourselves, our heirs, executors, and administrators, jointly and severally, etc., 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 etc. Signed 1863, May 4th, 1863. So this is a contract between two parties. If I can read the names, Mr. Cleary and Mr. Gump, maybe. Why would a contract between Mr. Cleary and Mr. Gump from Pennsylvania in 1863 be in the tax museum?
So there is something called the Cleary Act. I don't know what it is, though.
No.
What is it?
I don't know what the Cleary Act is either. But why is this contract? So on the back of this contract, you'll see there affixed is this little stamp. And that stamp,
it has the stamp says 50, must be 50 cents or something, and it has George Washington as the image.
And it says United States on one side, on the other side it says Internal Revenue. So this was before we had the constitutional amendment that actually gave us the income tax. And back then we funded our country in a lot of different ways, including selling a whole bunch of different types of what are called revenue stamps. So if you wanted to have a legally binding document, you'd have to buy one of these documentary stamps. And if the stamp was affixed to the document, then that was good. You'd pay your taxes and you had this document that was legally binding. So it was actually a pretty common way to raise money. It wasn't just documents. So actually I have hundreds of these stamps in the tax museum. So here is another picture. I'll show Scott there of a whole bunch of these other stamps. Well, what's more important than just like being able to see them is the types of things they're for. So I have a whole bunch of documentary stamps. So for one for a half a cent, 1 cent, 2 cent, 3 cent, 4 cent, 5 cent, 10 cents. But also here's one for a mortgage. Here's one for tobacco. Here's one from the state of Indiana for it says intangibles tax for $10. And not all of these are this old. So the intangibles tax from Indiana is from 1963. There's one from 1913 for uncolored oleomargarine. So we had margarine. It was uncolored. Then there was a law you had to color it so you could tell it from butter. But this was for uncolored oleomargarine, 30-cent tax from 1931. That's at the United States level. Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, stock transfer tax, motor vehicle tax for $5. So a lot of these different stamp taxes, again, to do a lot of different financial transactions or a lot of different things. I mean, I have a whole stack of the stamps just to buy a sack of potatoes. You had to have your tax paid on your potatoes that was evidenced by having a stamp on the potato sack.
So I'm so clueless that I'm trying to figure out exactly how this works. So was there actual stamps? I mean, if I look at them, they look like a stamp
It's
that you would
a physical stamp. I believe the vendor would have to buy these stamps, and then to be able to, so in the case of potatoes, to be able to sell them, you'd have to have the stamp affixed. We still do this actually. So for example, cigarettes still in some places will have a stamp that says that the vendor has paid the excise tax on tobacco and you're buying taxed tobacco. Okay,
but so when you say the vendor would affix them, not to the potatoes, but to a contract to buy potatoes?
Like to the bag of potatoes.
To the bag of potatoes. Okay.
Sure.
Which wouldn't work very good.
This isn't like Whole Foods where they package individual potatoes in plastic wrap and put a barcode on each potato.
Maybe there's a little bit of stamp tax right in that barcode someplace.
Maybe.
Okay, so that's very cool. I did not know that. I mean, I've heard of stamp taxes before, but what you're telling me
that was like the Revolutionary War, the Stamp Act. I mean, they were putting stamps on things, and people didn't like that. Got them angry, but we had them for a long time, and actually, we still have some stamps. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Okay. So I have here. This is not a stamp, but this is the law that dictates some stamps that still exist. I'm holding up a yellow piece of paper. It says machine guns and certain other firearms, and in parentheses, the National Firearms Act, Part 179 of Title 26, Code of Federal Regulations. And this is from the United States Treasury, Internal Revenue Service. So what does this have to do with guns? Well, it's from the Internal Revenue Service. What does it have to do with taxes? It's from the Internal Revenue Service. This is part of the tax code that actually dictates excise taxes that are owed on certain firearms. So if you buy, for example, a fully automatic firearm gun, or a suppressor for a gun.
I thought it was illegal to buy a fully automatic firearm.
So people say it's illegal. It's not actually illegal. It's just super highly regulated. And one of the ways that they regulate it is you have to buy a stamp, a $200 stamp.
Okay, so while we're on the topic of guns,
and so if you're, go ahead. Sorry.
People use guns to hunt.
Yep.
And often when you buy a license to hunt, for example, ducks, you have to get a duck stamp. Is that
Correct.
The same idea?
Yeah, I think they go to different amounts. I think the duck stamp, so it's a little bit different, I think. I think the purpose of the $200 stamp, for example, for a suppressor is to regulate the suppressors to make them more costly, to make them so fewer people will want them. I don't even know what they do with the money. for the wildlife, my understanding is they use that money like intentionally to help the ducks. Somehow that money goes to the ducks.
I see. So the use of the tax raised might be different, but basically it is a tax of some form.
It's a tax. Yeah, that's my understanding at least. Okay, so that's number one, stamps, and we still got them today.
Well, that's amazing because I knew about stamp taxes, but I didn't realize that they historically had literally existed as actual stamps.
Yeah, as physical stamps. I mean, actually, there's many items in the tax museum that you just like, there's just random items, and the only reason it's in there is because it actually has a stamp affixed to it. So like bottles, I have bottles of alcohol, I have cigarette packages, cigarette wrappers, like rolled cigarettes, playing cards. Right here, if you're looking at the image, there's playing cards right behind me. It's because they have some of these playing card stamps affixed to them. So
wow.
That's that.
Cool. That's
okay,
very
next item. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
This is one of my favorites. You might have seen this one before, but I love this story. So this is speaking of stamps, this is an actual postage stamp that has nothing to do, or it's not going to fund anything.
I know what this is. I want to start here. Okay, so this is a postage stamp, and it has someone on it, and the person I think it has on it is Elvis Presley, if I am not mistaken.
Elvis Presley, yep.
And here, what I think is interesting about this stamp
What's the country?
It's not an American stamp.
Yep.
I think that this is probably a Bermuda stamp.
No, it says right there what stamp it is. It's from Burkina Faso.
Oh, I can't. Oh, I see. I was looking in the wrong spot. Yeah, I see it. It says Burkina Faso.
Burkina Faso with Elvis Presley on it. So the question is, why is Elvis Presley on a Burkina Faso postage stamp?
So here's my guess. Burkina Faso is a sovereign country. Because it's a sovereign country, it can do whatever it wants without having to deal with, say, the United States copyright laws. And so it's going to use the fame of someone else to raise money for Burkina Faso. And what will happen is people in America will want those stamps, so they'll buy a whole bunch of those stamps because Elvis Presley is on them, and it will just basically be a way to raise money for the government.
Okay, that's correct, but there's yet another tax tie-in. Well, I ask actually a very specific question. Why is Elvis Presley on the Burkina Faso postage stamp? If you were to Google that, the first result will be a published academic paper by Joel Slemrod. That's the name of the paper is, why is Elvis Presley on the Burkina Faso postage stamp? And he says exactly what you just said, that Burkina Faso sells these. They make some amount of money just from selling this, but he ties it even more directly into taxes other than just raising money through the sale of stamps. And it's a concept that he calls the monetization of state sovereignty. And you basically, sovereign states, sovereign countries can do things that nobody else can do, including print stamps, and they make a little bit of money by printing those stamps. But here's something else that Burkina Faso and many of these other stamp pandering nations, this is a phrase that Joel coins in his paper, stamp panderers, is these kinds of countries that sell these stamps. Many of these stamp panderers also have one other attribute in common that is also the monetization of state sovereignty. And what is that, do you think?
I'm going to guess they're small island nations that are tourist destinations.
And what else are they besides being tourist destinations?
I don't know.
It's the tax museum.
What?
It's the tax museum.
I don't get it.
They're tax havens.
Oh. Well, but I mean, they don't have to do that, but they're just desperate for money.
It's related. They're just doing these items. So just like you can pander stamps because you're like basically monetizing your sovereignty, another way to do that is you set a tax rate. You're a sovereign nation. You can have whatever tax rate you want. You can derive a little bit of money from like having these companies, even though they pay no taxes, they have like these fees and stuff like that. They pay to incorporate in your country. And so it's part of the monetization of state sovereignty.
I feel like that might be a spurious correlation.
You can run a regression and it loads up. I don't actually think it is. I think it's probably a thing. Okay, next item. Let's not get too long up here. Okay, you ready?
You don't want to get sidetracked on spurious correlation?
No.
Okay.
I have on my museum curator hat, which is not too empirically based. Okay, so here's another one. This is one of my favorite stories. This is a Willie Nelson album, and I'll actually cover up part of the thing because that would just give it away. And it's two tapes, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Willie Nelson, there he is on the front.
Who'll Buy My Memories?
Who'll Buy My Memories is the name of the album. is partially the name of the album.
All right, I think I know.
Tracks such as Fool by My Memories, Jimmy's Road. Actually, Jimmy's Road is quite a nice... If you haven't listened to Jimmy's Road, you should listen to Jimmy's Road. It's very sad. And very,
I think you should sing it for us.
I can't sing Jimmy's Road. I'd tear up.
You would tear up. Okay.
You should watch this. It's like a war protest.
All right. Well,
if I remember correctly. Anyway, so what do you got? What does this have to do with taxes?
I don't think I've heard you talk to me about this before, but I guess that I know. I know that Willie Nelson had a lot of financial trouble. Yep. And I know that he probably declared bankruptcy. And I know that when that happens, often these kind of wealthy or people who get rich from their fame are not always the most savvy financial planners. And my guess is he failed to pay taxes and owed the IRS a ton of money. And so he somehow sold the IRS an album as part of his negotiations with them or something like that.
Yeah,
or used the money from the
you've
album.
Heard this story, but are forgetting parts. But yeah, so that's a lot of it. So it's not just Fooled by My Memories. I'm holding it up again. It says Fooled by My Memories. And another part of the title is the IRS tapes. And so it wasn't that he failed financially and went bankrupt. He was actually sold what ended up being an illegal tax planning scheme by an accountant engaged in a tax shelter that the IRS said, like, this is illegal. You can't do this. You owe us all this money. And I'm just going to make up the amounts because I should have looked them up, but I don't know them. So let's say he owed like $10 million. And the settlement was they were first going to have an auction where they auctioned off a lot of Mr. Nelson's stuff. Okay. And so this song, Fooled by My Memories, is all about that auction. Like he's auctioning off his whole entire life. So he writes a song about the auction. So what's fascinating is people actually, who bought the stuff? Well, all of Willie Nelson's fans. And then a lot of the stuff, they actually just returned to Willie Nelson. So it was like basically crowd-funded from his fans by buying the stuff and then giving it back to him. And then another part of the settlement is he had to produce a tape. Here's the record right here, the IRS tapes, and then some portion of those proceeds went to the IRS. And if he did that, it would be his tax debt would be fully paid off. My understanding is he did not actually raise nearly as much as the IRS hoped, so the IRS did not get that good of a deal. This is the only time they've ever done that, as far as I know. And that's Willie Nelson.
So what you're saying is
by my memories.
Willie Nelson's tape for the IRS was not quite as valuable as Bruce Springsteen's $500 billion deal with Sony that was announced yesterday.
Yeah, not quite as valuable.
So now this is interesting because not far from where I grew up in rural Utah, there was a ranch. And as you drove by on Highway 89 in the middle of Utah, there was a kind of a gate to the ranch, and above it were the initials WN, and the rumor was it was one of Willie Nelson's ranches. I have no idea if that's true. Somebody should figure this out. But there was a rumor that he had financial trouble and that it was auctioned off. So I wonder if it's connected with that.
It could have been. He did. It wasn't. I mean, he might have had a financial trouble other times, but this time he was sold in a legal tax shelter, engaged in it, and ended up having to pay a whole bunch of money.
Okay, so if all you Willie Nelson fans out there, email Jeff and I and let us know if you know the rest of the story.
He owns some property by Manta, Utah.
Well, it's a little bit north, about 30 miles north, but yeah.
Which is still basically Manta, Utah.
It's still basically Manta,
30
Utah.
miles means nothing out there.
That's true.
Okay. The next item is a big stack of, here I'm holding up right here, a big stack of losing lottery tickets. And when I say stack, I mean these are individual little tickets. There may be 3 inches by 2 inches, and I have a good 4 inches of tickets. It's a pretty big, hefty stack. They say things like pick 4 reward points code, $1 draw. So this is from the first stack is from 2015. That's it. Losing lottery tickets.
So I do know this one, and it's not because Jeff loves to play the lottery and buys a lot of lottery tickets and loses, which is almost always what happens when you play the lottery, by the way. But
it's a tax on being bad at math, as they call that.
That's exactly what it is. It's a tax on being bad at math. And Jeff is good at math.
Well,
and so I know that he doesn't play the lottery, at least not on a regular basis. So I know that, I mean, the stack Jeff held up had to have had hundreds of lottery tickets in it, would be my guess.
Yes.
So maybe even more. So I know the story here. This is actually an amazing story because one can go to eBay and purchase losing lottery tickets. And you might ask yourself, why on earth would anybody want to purchase a losing lottery ticket? And the answer is to engage in tax fraud. Am I right?
Like a big F fraud. Yeah, a lot of tax things are like tax planning or tax, whatever. This is outright fraud, correct?
This is fraud. So here's how it works. When you cannot deduct your gambling losses unless you have gambling winnings. But if you suddenly have a bunch of gambling winnings, you have a whole bunch of taxable income. And what would be amazing is if you had a whole bunch of gambling losses to offset that gambling income to reduce your tax burden. So what you can do is you can go to eBay and buy losing lottery tickets for, of course, much less than what the tickets were sold for in the first place.
Like $10 for $1,000 stack.
$10 bucks
back when I bought these
for $1,000 stack. Okay, so it's $1,000 of lottery losses. Only they weren't your losses; they were somebody else's losses. Yeah. But you pay $10 for them, and then you're going to get a deduction, and that deduction is going to help offset your tax, which will be at the highest rate. So it'd be like $350 worth of deductions for $10.
Yep.
Fraudulent deductions.
Well, so it's the ability to document that to save those 300. So you also, if you're like thinking about what the price should be, you'd have to factor in there the probability of audit, because you only need this documentation if you get audited. You can write down anything you want on your tax return, and you only have to prove it upon audit. And so
it makes me think that somebody could like identify a risk aversion parameter in a study by figuring out how much people are willing to pay for losing lottery tickets.
Well, so what's interesting is you can actually get on eBay and get his archival data on past auctions. And so I actually did this once. I was like sitting down watching MacGyver, and you don't have anything better to do with the other half of your brain while you're watching MacGyver. So I pulled down the eBay data and graphed out several years worth of prices and frequency of these auctions. And what I was hoping is to see like a whole bunch in April, which would suggest that people are not buying these while they're getting audited, but actually buying these in anticipation of just filing their tax return. I couldn't find really much variation in either the frequency of these postings, which would be the supply side, knowing that the demand exists in April, or any increase in price. But there weren't there's always a few of them out there on eBay, but there's not like thousands, and so it's hard to back into.
So is your hypothesis that people don't buy these when they file their taxes? They buy them when they get the notice that they're going to be audited, and they hurry in?
I'm not sure. The problem with that is you'd have to buy ones from past year. They'd have to line up in year. So I was hoping it would be clear they were buying them upon filing, and to me, I think from the data that I had, I just didn't learn much.
But the very fact that these are listed on eBay is evidence per se of tax fraud.
Oh, definitely. And it's not just the losing lottery tickets. You can buy charitable, like people that have like receipts from Goodwill for donations, which is a little bit problematic in that those are limited in how much you can use them. But anyway, okay, very good. Next item. Are you ready for the next item?
I can't wait.
Okay. I have a whole stack of items here that we won't have time, so I have to ration and figure out which one I want to show. I have a stack of currency from Venezuela, and they have these very colorful pictures. U.S. money is really kind of boring. It's very colorful. This one has like some dolphins. It's for dos bolivares, up through. I have a 20,000 bolivar note. These are from 2016.
Is a 20,000 bolivar currently worth about 10 cents?
Oh, I from 2016, it's completely worthless.
Not worth anything?
My guess, I don't know, but my guess is it's absolutely worthless.
Yeah, and they are very colorful. So there's blue and orange and yellow and red.
I like the armadillo one.
There's an armadillo. There was a dolphin.
What an animal to honor, the armadillo.
What other animals you got? Dolphins, armadillos?
Some kind of fancy bird, falcon-looking thing, a turtle.
Un pájaro.
Maybe un oso frontino.
Un oso frontino. That would be a bear, some kind of frontier bear, but I don't know I don't know what frontino is. What's frontino?
Well, the problem is an oso hormiguero, for example, is an anteater, so it doesn't have to be a kind of bear. It could just have oso in front of it. I don't even know what an oso frontero.
Okay, does it look like a bear?
What has it got to do with taxes?
I I have no idea. I could imagine you saying this has something to do with inflation, but I don't know what it has to do with
That's
taxes.
it. Inflation is a tax. We often forget that the government can raise money by a lot of ways. One way is just printing money, and that's probably inflationary. So I not only have I aspire to collect many types of inflationary currency back behind me. I do have some what is it called? Reichmarks from Germany. They were quite inflated. I got these Venezuelan money. I also have some Confederate money. Because
cool.
the Confederacy, one of the many stupid things that they did is started inflating their currency near the end of the Civil War. So yeah, inflation is a tax.
So do you have any U.S. dollars? Because they might soon become important.
They might need to be entered officially into the tax. So these are, sorry, when I say inflationary, I mean like hyperinflationary. So, we're at like 6, 7, 8%. That's real bad. But these countries are in like the hundreds of thousands of percent. So we're a ways away from that, but
we are not pushing our cash around in wheelbarrows yet.
Not quite yet.
Okay, let's hope that does not happen. But it is interesting. Often in the political sphere, we hear we want to tax the rich. We want to give all these things to the not so rich. How are we going to fund it? We can't fund it with the taxes we have. Let's just print money, or we'll borrow, or whatever. By doing so, the risk is we create inflation, and inflation is not just a tax on the rich. It, in fact, might even harm the poor more than the rich. So that's very interesting. Good call.
Various stories are told about that. It gets complicated, but
it does get complicated.
Inflation. The bottom line is inflation could properly be viewed as a tax.
Yeah.
Okay. We have an item here that I think is amazing. So it is a little stack of stubs there, and it says, the tax connection here can't really be hidden. I'll read you what it says. It says 3 cents, always obtained from vendor, State of Ohio, prepaid sales tax, consumer's receipt on all taxable purchases, Ohio consumer's receipt, Merrick Lithography Company.
Well, this is interesting because this has probably to do, well, obviously it's sales tax, but it might also be a way to document your sales and use tax if it was not collected by the vendor. So the interesting thing about sales tax is we all pay it, but none of us really write a check to the government for it. Instead, we give our tax to the vendor, and then the vendor remits the tax to the government. But what most people don't know, and in fact, many people are guilty of tax fraud, because there is in almost every state, I believe, what is called the sales and use tax, which basically says if you didn't pay sales tax on something that you purchased, like back in the good old days when you could order stuff off the internet and not pay sales tax, you are still legally obligated to report the value of those purchases to your state and pay sales tax on them, and nobody did.
Yeah, so you're thinking this addresses the sales and use tax problems of the last 10 or 15 years.
No, I'm thinking this goes way back before they had collections, and so they would audit you on sales and use tax. No. But if you wanted to prove that you paid it, you would say, oh, I gave it to the vendor, and here's this receipt that I have.
So the sales tax has always been, as far as I know, has always been remitted by the vendor, by the store.
Okay.
And so what the problem was when they first started up the sales tax, and this is in Ohio, they turned on the sales tax machine and said, we're going to have sales tax, is the vendor could just like take the sales taxes from the consumer and just not remit it, and they just keep it. And so, or alternatively, just not charge sales tax. And if the consumer and the vendor were both colluding and were both happy with that, or if the consumer just didn't even know, I mean, a lot of people in the beginning probably wouldn't even know that this system existed. There are many different problems in the initiation of the sales tax in a lot of places, including Ohio. So what they did is they started these little campaigns where the vendor would have to buy these little receipts from the state, and they would give the receipts, and they basically trained people to expect to get these receipts. And then what these receipts were is lottery tickets. On each one of these little stubs, there's a different number, and they would have little drawings, and you could win things by having your basically receipt from your sales tax get drawn at random from all the different receipts.
Wow. Okay. So this is the
government training people to pay the sales tax. They did that for a while, and they stopped doing it because people figured out they actually had to pay the sale. They should expect to pay the sales tax, and the stores eventually started actually remitting it.
Although every now and then we do hear of a business that fails to remit sales tax, and the owner usually ends up in jail or something because they do that.
For the ones you hear about, yeah.
Yeah, the ones you hear about. Yep. Okay, very interesting. What else you got for me? I think we got time for one more.
Okay, one.
Last one. Make it the best.
That's
the best of all the game.
Very best. Okay, I have a can, and a lot of people are coming to my office asking me about this, of White Claw hard seltzer. This is watermelon flavored. It has a mere 100 calories. It's gluten-free. It says spiked sparkling water with a hint of watermelon.
Are you saving this up for a rough day when one of your papers gets rejected?
No, that would be like every day. I'd need a giant case of it if it was for paper rejections.
Okay. Well, I know there's a lot of taxes on alcoholic beverages, but I don't know the story here, so you're going to have to tell me.
This is a pretty fascinating story. The short version of the story is there are a lot of different taxes on alcoholic beverages, but it's not just like, one tax on all different kinds of alcoholic beverages. They basically charge tax on different kinds of alcoholic beverages, depending also upon how it's actually produced. It's not just the end product, but like how the alcohol actually got into the beverage. And for a long time, the way they would have made alcoholic sparkling water would have been taxed at a rate that would have made it prohibitively expensive to sell as something that like undergrads at Duke or UNC would have wanted to drink all the time, right? Because this is not White Claw is not expensive. So there are types
when you say drink all the time, I'm hoping you mean on the weekends.
I have no idea when they drink it. All I know is when I go into Walmart, I'm confronted with giant pallets of the stuff.
Just
they're
not
drinking it sometime.
Hopefully not during your class.
They're drinking it sometime. So there's certainly alcohol that's very expensive, and there could be a high excise tax on that expensive alcohol because as a portion of the price, it might not be that much or something like that. But for this type of thing, it was basically prohibitive to create alcoholic sparkling water for a while because they didn't have a way to put the alcohol in it that would be not subject to this higher level of tax. But then the technology improved and somebody figured out how to actually make the alcoholic sparkling water in a way that would basically shift the category of alcohol that it was taxed under. And so now the excise tax is much lower and they can sell it in a way that makes it not as costly, and so the undergrads can buy it.
So nothing like using technology to
avoid
tax.
Shift the classification that you're taxed in. Yep.
And we should mention that classification shifting is one of the fundamental ways to avoid tax. So now we're talking here about classification of a process.
And to be clear, I think they did actually change the process. So it's not just like they relabeled something, and we could do one more that is just a pure relabeling, but they actually fundamentally changed the physical process, and it got lower tax. And I don't know that they necessarily did it just for the taxes, but because they did that, it got lower taxes, and they could sell it.
Yeah, and relabeling is a common strategy. So you might say, I have some income that would normally be like labor income, like from working, but if I could somehow convert that to be like capital gains income, the tax rate would be lower.
Or as a final example, let's say you sell a Jaffa cake.
Jeff's holding up a Jaffa cake. I don't even know what a Jaffa cake is.
It's called Jaffa cakes. I mean, you lived in the UK for a little while, so you would have been in stores that sell Jaffa cake. So a Jaffa cake, it's like I would call it a cookie. It's about the size as far as its diameter across of an Oreo. It has a soft chocolate thing. It's like a moist center. It's sold in the cookie department of stores in the UK and other places in the world where they sell these, most of the UK. And so the classification issue here is in the UK, the value added tax applies differently to cakes than to biscuits. Or biscuit, we just call it cookie. There's a different rate on a biscuit as a cake. Okay.
Okay.
And since it's called Jaffa cakes, guess which rate's lower?
Clearly, the cake rate is lower than the cookie rate, probably because cookies are no good for you, and so they want to tax.
I don't know why cakes would be any better, but they did not. Unlike White Claw, they didn't fundamentally change anything. They just said, okay, it's a cake. We're really going to call it a cake. It's definitely a cake, and they support the cake designation, and they get that lower VAT rate.
Okay, when I get home today, I'm going to have to ask my kids if they ever had Jaffa cake. We were in England for 4 months, and we lived and ate and shopped at British grocery stores and probably had a Jaffa Cake. I just don't remember.
So I actually bought many boxes of these Jaffa Cakes right before the pandemic to feed to my students. And then we had the pandemic shut down, so we couldn't eat the cakes. And after we started coming back to the office, one of my colleagues, John Hand, would come in and he would say, "Is today a good day for a Jaffa Cake?" So you have to know John Hand is English, not British. He's English, and
yes.
grew up eating Jaffa Cakes. And so he consumed all of the Jaffa Cakes that were supposed to be for my undergrads during the pandemic at John Hand's insistence that we eat Jaffa Cakes.
Now, and this is a topic for another day, but I thought an English person was also a British person, but not vice versa.
Yes, I believe that's correct, but they might prefer to be called English. To not be intermingled with all the other British that are not English.
I gotcha. Okay, good. Well, this has been very fascinating, Jeff, and we have barely scratched the surface of the Tax Museum. So we need to, at some point in the future, we'll do a round 2 of Tax Museum, a round 2 of the Tax Museum tour, and it'll be very fun. Are you game?
Sure. Let's do it.
Okay, so at some point in the future, we'll do round 2. Hopefully you have found round 1 enjoyable. This has been another episode of Tax Chats. We hope you'll tune in again next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.